Hello and welcome to Helpful Think, home of historical, true facts that tickle your brain. If you enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe. Today we will be diving into the euthanasia of King George V, which unfortunately occurred without his consent. Euthanasia is defined as the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable condition carried out by a medical professional. This euthanasia, or should I say murder, took place in 1936, and you will never believe whose hands ended up with his blood on them. George Frederick Ernest Albert was the second son of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. He spent most of his life with little expectation to ever find himself in a place of power, as he was third in line to the throne following his father and his older brother, Prince Albert Victor. George spent time traveling the seas and later serving in the Royal Navy from ages 12 to 27 alongside his aforementioned brother and John Neal Dalton, their tutor. During his time in the Royal Navy, he traveled to many different territories, some of which being South Africa, Australia, and Japan. In fact, during his time in Japan in the year 1881, he reportedly got a tattoo on his arm of a red and blue dragon done by a local artist. George's tutor, John Neal Dalton, very heavily documented this time in George's life through the use of a journal which was titled The Cruise of H.S.M. Bacanti. One report within this journal states that the crew had come across the Flying Dutchman, the legendary ghost ship, while sailing between Melbourne and Sydney, Australia. During his years as a young man, George spent a great deal of time with his uncle Prince Albert, Duke of Edinburgh. During this time he also grew close to his cousin Princess Marie of Edinburgh, whom he fell in love with. Although some family members supported this relationship, his and Marie's mothers both did not, and ultimately led to Marie refusing George's proposal and marrying Ferdinand, future King of Romania, in the year 1893. Prince Albert Victor, George's older brother, was engaged to wed his second cousin once removed, Princess Victoria Mary of Teck, informally and affectionately known as May, during the year 1891. However, 6 weeks after the formal engagement, Prince Albert Victor unexpectedly died due to a severe case of pneumonia during the influenza pandemic. Prince Albert Victor's death caused George to be second in line to the throne, and since he was still in need of a bride, it was determined that Princess Victoria Mary of Teck was a suitable match for him. 1 year after his brother's death, George proposed to Mary of Teck, and she accepted. They went on to marry in July of 1893, and throughout the marriage had a total of 5 sons and 1 daughter. George's father, Edward VII, died on May 6, 1910, thus beginning George V's reign as king. George was deeply affected by his father's death, as one entry in his journal stated, "I have lost my best friend and the best of fathers. I never had a crossword with him in my life. I am heartbroken and overwhelmed with grief, but God will help me in my responsibilities, and darling May will be my comfort as she has always been. May God give me strength and guidance in the heavy task which has fallen on me." During George's reign, there was a great deal of political strife, and the political climate of the British Empire was experiencing radical change. His 26-year reign saw a rise in socialism, communism, fascism, Irish republicanism, and the Indian independence movement. He was also on the throne during World War I, which reportedly caused a grave impact on his physical health. George's health continued to see a radical decline after the immense stress of World War I. He was also known to be a heavy smoker, and this caused his recovery to be slow and uncertain. And after he was thrown from his horse on October 28, 1915, George's health saw a steady decline. Following this throw from his horse, he suffered from chronic bronchitis for 10 years. In the year 1925, George was prescribed a recuperative cruise by his doctors where he was to sail to the Mediterranean. During 1928, George suffered from septicemia, more commonly known as blood poisoning, which left him with an uncharacteristically large abscess between his right lung and diaphragm. Over the years, George's son Edward took over many of George's duties as his health continued to decline. Following the death of his favorite sister, Victoria, George became depressed and essentially gave up all hope of recovery. George was administered oxygen and was often in and out of consciousness. George V died on January 20, 1936. Controversy surrounding his death was not publicly known until the year 1986. The diary of George's physician, Lord Bertrand Dawson, was made public during this year. An excerpt from this diary written on the day of George's death stated, At about 11 o'clock, it was evident that the last stage might endure for many hours, unknown to the patient but little comporting with that dignity and serenity which he so richly merited and which demanded a brief final scene. Hours of waiting just for the mechanical end when all that is really life has departed only exhausts the onlookers and keeps them so strained that they cannot avail themselves of the solace of thought, communion, or prayer. I therefore decided to determine the end and injected, myself, morphia grammar 3/4 grains, and shortly afterwards cocaine 1 grains into the distended jugular vein. In about 1/4 an hour, breathing, quieter appearance, more placid physical struggle gone. According to Dawson's writings, he intended to allow the king a painless and dignified death, and felt that it was best to administer this cocktail of drugs to placate the king and ultimately kill him. Dawson also stated in later journal entries that this would guarantee that the death would be reported in the morning papers as opposed to the evening papers, which he felt was a less appropriate way to announce the death of the king. This injection administered by Lord Bertrand Dawson ultimately killed the king, an act alternatively known as euthanasia. However, it is thought that the king did not consent to this act of mercy killing, as his last words following an audible and physical struggle were, "God damn you." So, what do you think? Was this an act of murder or a work of fiction? Let us know what you think in the comments. The most insightful response will be pinned. Peace, and as always, take time today and every day to tickle your brain.